We are in the middle of the third wave, more dangerous and damaging than any we have been through. The original COVID-19 was challenging enough, but this virus keeps mutating and scientists are discovering new and more potent variants. One of them is wreaking havoc across India, where they're having mass cremations. And one of the things we're learning with these gigantic viral pandemics is how interdependent we are. If there is a dangerous virus in any part of the globe, no country is safe. Our ICUs are full to capacity. Our healthcare workers are exhausted. And doctors say they are frightened, not just for themselves, but for others and what might happen to our country. In the thick of this crisis, we are at Good Shepherd Sunday, when we reflect on the message of God's incredible love and care for us, and how precious we are to Him. Words like salvation, atonement, or redemption are abstract and hard to understand. We don't use those words in everyday life. Jesus didn't use them. He said instead, I am the Good Shepherd. He used a concrete image that people understood. In the ancient world, they respected the shepherd, even if when he came in from the wild outdoors, he would smell to high heaven. The shepherd, you see, knew his sheep, and he would risk his life to protect them, to care for them, and keep them safe from any wild animals like a lion and the bear, and lead them to green pastures and quiet waters. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, cries the psalmist. Why? Because the Lord is my shepherd. We hear that imagery in Psalm 85. He is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. In the midst of the exile in Babylon, Isaiah looks ahead to the promised Messiah, and he looks forward with bounding faith. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms and carry them in his bosom, and he will gently guide the young. It's hard for us to appreciate the power and beauty of that image. We're not accustomed to shepherds and sheep wandering the countryside. William Barclay said the closest thing he could imagine from Scotland, which was his home, was when people sometimes spoke of the good doctor. The good doctor. They're not necessarily praising the doctor's efficiency or skill as a physician, but are thinking more of his kindness and sympathy and graciousness, in addition, of course, to his medical knowledge and skills. When I think of the good doctor, I think of a dear friend, Avery Vaughan, a general surgeon who died about 5 years ago. In addition to his medical practice, he also led a painting group in our church in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and he taught me to paint. He told me once of a young man who brought in his ailing father to his office. The old man was filled with cancer. He was just too poor to take time away from work and had neglected his painful symptoms for far too long. He had worked hard all his life, and now he was dying, without much to show for all his labor. Avery led the young man, the son, to his house, and pointed to a fairly new leather recliner sofa, and said to the young man, "You take that sofa and put it in your truck, and let your father be as comfortable as possible in his last days." Would you even think of doing that? I consider Avery, that doctor, as a mentor, as a second father, in my life. He was, in every way, the good doctor. I wonder how you see yourself right now. As a sheep which needs comfort and nurture, and that's all right. Or a sturdy shepherd, guiding, guarding, and helping others home. Here's a story which is instructive at many levels. Dr. Christopher Chen is a 44-year-old cardiologist and a triathlete, extremely fit. One Monday evening, he went to bed with aches and pains. It was followed by a fever. By Friday, he was having trouble taking deep breaths. On Sunday, he was lightheaded and winded, just walking to the washroom. He came from a family of doctors, and there were many opinions, of course. But in this, they were united. Go immediately to the hospital. And before he left home, his wife called on all their friends and asked for prayer, saying, "We need to lean on a higher power." At the hospital, they discovered he had pneumonia in every part of his lungs and COVID-related inflammation. But the hospital was terrific. He knew all the nurses and specialists who worked there. They would knock on his window and call on his cell phone and remind him that he was in very good hands. But he grew despondent. He knew he was not getting better. Nurses would come in fully gowned for no more than 2 minutes. He felt like he was standing alone, staring into a dark tunnel, worrying about himself, his wife, and children. He was losing ground. The nights were at their worst. The fevers were at their highest, and his breathing the most labored. He was covered with tubes and wires, and he said he began to understand what his cardiac patients felt like. His ICU nurse was a 6-foot-tall black woman from Jamaica named Helen. He thought she must have been a drill instructor in another life. He said, if she wanted me to sit on the edge of the bed and I said no or grumbled, we reached an understanding. I sat on the edge of the bed. Helen started her shift by changing his gown and sheets, then helped him take a chlorhexidine towel bath. And he said those small acts of kindness felt wonderful. Despite having trouble breathing, he sometimes fell asleep, and as he fell into a deep sleep, his breathing would slow and his oxygen level would drop to unsafe levels. And Helen would burst into the room and yell, "Chris, come on, you've got to breathe. Breathe for me." And he would wake and take faster breaths, and his blood oxygen level would rise. You see, with low blood oxygen, there would be heart and brain damage. And he knew if he were put on a ventilator, his chances of dying would skyrocket. He was one of the lucky ones. Though it was in short supply, they found a powerful antiviral drug called remdesivir. And within hours of his treatment, he could sit up in his chair. As he was being discharged from ICU, the shift was changing, and all he could say to Helen as she headed home was an emotional "thank you for getting me through." As they wheeled him out of the ICU, he could see other COVID patients, many of them on ventilators, but he would get to be a husband and father, a brother and son. It is a story with many layers to it. It might say to us, don't mess around with COVID. It can affect even the young and the healthy. Or it might say, be grateful for people like Helen, a black woman, an essential healthcare worker. But today I would like to focus on this truth. Good Shepherd Sunday reminds us that her love is like God's amazing love, and that God is always for us in the extremes of life or even in the moments of death and beyond. Somewhere, I think outside Belmont near London, Ontario, I saw a sign with the words, "Prepare to meet thy God." Perhaps you've seen signs like that. That sign was meant as a warning, as though meeting God would be a terrible calamity, something to be avoided at all costs. But what if God is really the Good Shepherd? What if God is like Jesus, who loves us more than we love ourselves and desires to care for us in kind and gentle ways? The passage says to us, the Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. In the Old Testament sacrificial system, and also some other cultures, they rounded up an unblemished lamb, the most perfect lamb they could find, and sacrificed it on an altar to God. But in the Gospels, we encounter Jesus, who gives up his life not to appease an angry God, but to show us the height and the depth and the length of God's incredible love for us. It is an enacted story which says to us, "This is how much I love you." Some of you are avid readers and belong to book clubs and enjoy discussing your book or just visiting, which is incidentally a very healthy activity in these times of stress and isolation. Perhaps you've read Graham Greene's The Heart of the Matter. It is an old book which came out in 1948, but true to so much of life. Random House placed it at number 40 of the top 100 books of the 20th century. Major Scobie is a British intelligence officer who's been placed in Freetown, Sierra Leone. He is a religious man, but has given in to corruption and bribery, adultery, and possibly even murder. His life has become so very complicated. He believes his life is an utter failure, and he only wants to end it all. He enters his church and stares at the crucifix. He could understand if God came to Palestine. But to put himself at the mercy of men who would shame him and crucify him, that did not make any sense. And he pauses and continues to think and reflect. And he thinks to himself how desperately God must love. And that is the truth for today. My dear friends, these are difficult days with COVID. There's isolation, uncertainty, anxiety, and stress. But hear the gospel, the good news, as an additional spiritual resource to all the other things you may be doing to help yourself get through. Jesus said, "I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep." It's a truth worthy of your deepest reflection and a continual turning over in your mind and spirit.